I was in a cafe the other day, and I was just observing this group of students. They were sitting together, inches apart, but in total, complete silence.
All on their phones, I assume.
Every single one. And every few seconds, you'd see one of them just reflexively tap their screen. Their eyes were darting around with this kind of low-level ambient panic. It just didn't look like anyone enjoying a social experience. It was. It was the look of a creature caught in some kind of high-stakes survival game that they didn't know how to turn off.
And that's the thing, isn't it? We keep talking about this collapse in well-being. The 2026 World Happiness Report documented so starkly, and we frame it as a crisis of what? Individual resilience.
Or digital literacy. Like if we just taught people how to use their phones better, it would all go away.
Right. But what you saw in that cafe, that's not a lack of grit. It is a systemic hardware failure.
A hardware failure. I like that.
It's the only way to look at it. You have to remember, your brain was meticulously, painstakingly evolved to navigate a very specific environment.
A tribe of about 150 people on a physical savanna.
Exactly. And in that world, getting a cold shoulder from a peer wasn't just an insult. It wasn't just a bad feeling.
It's a survival threat.
A profound survival threat. And today, that same ancient social exclusion alarm is being tripped 1 million times a day by strangers in a global coliseum every time a notification doesn't pop up.
It's like a smoke detector that's been hardwired to go off every time someone lights a match 3 towns over.
A perfect analogy.
Yeah.
So what happens when you take a biological organism and you just flood its status-seeking modules with this digital candy 24/7?
You get what biologists saw in those Universe 25 experiments.
The behavioral sink.
Yeah.
A resource-rich utopia where the creatures simply stopped. They just stopped. They withdrew. They became paralyzed by a density of social signals they were never, ever built to process.
So we aren't just unhappy. We are running Paleolithic software on a hyper-digital mainframe that is, frankly, overheating.
And that data from 2026, it isn't just a warning. It's the sound of the system finally crashing. It's the sound of our biology failing because the digital savanna has become a place we can no longer survive.
That observation is, well, it's critical.
Yeah.
And it really perfectly encapsulates what we want to do in this deep dive.
Yes. If we're seeing this synchronous global decline in mental well-being, especially among young people, the root cause just can't be individual character flaws. It can't be.
It has to be environmental.
It has to be. We're dealing with a profound environmental crisis that's hitting us at the neurological and the evolutionary level. It is, like you said, a systemic hardware failure.
I think we really need to stop treating this like some kind of cultural malaise and start treating it as what it is, a design flaw.
Precisely. And that's our goal here today. We're going to analyze exactly how our ancient, evolved psychological software is being exploited by this hyper-digital mainframe we've built around ourselves.
So we're going to break down the core concepts.
We are. We're going to look at evolutionary mismatch. We'll get into the specifics of how dopamine gets hijacked by these platforms, the chaos caused by what we call social density overload, and then
the ultimate threat.
The ultimate and very dire sociological threat posed by the behavioral sink. We have to understand the mechanism before we can even begin to think about a solution.
Okay, so let's unpack that framework. We're looking for an explanation for why some of the most materially wealthy societies on Earth are seeing an epidemic of mental distress. Why is prosperity creating this pathology?
The lens we need is evolutionary psychiatry. It's a field that doesn't just ask how our brains work, the neurotransmitters, the genes, but it asks the ultimate question. It asks why.
Why do these traits that cause so much suffering even exist? Why do they persist in the population?
And the uncomfortable answer the field provides is that evolution is guided by one and only one metric: reproductive success, fitness.
Not individual health.
Emphatically not individual health or personal happiness. Those are secondary at best.
So a trait that gave our ancestors an edge in survival, even if it made them anxious or miserable, that was a successful trait.
Absolutely. Think about it. We are all the descendants of successful anxiety, of successful paranoia, of successful status seeking. Those who weren't anxious enough about the rustle in the grass, well, they didn't become our ancestors.
And that principle leads us right to the foundational concept for this whole deep dive.
The evolutionary mismatch.
Okay, so define that mismatch for us. What is it exactly?
A mismatch happens when a trait that evolved to be adaptive in our ancestral environment.
Which researchers call the EEA, right? The environment of evolutionary adaptiveness.
Correct. So a trait that was adaptive in the EEA suddenly becomes maladaptive, sometimes pathologically so, in our novel modern environment.
The key thing being that the brain's mechanism hasn't changed at all.
Not one bit. The environment has changed around it radically and rapidly.
The classic example that always comes up is food, isn't it?
It's the easiest parallel to draw, and it's a perfect one. Our brains evolved during the Paleolithic era. High-calorie, high-sugar, high-fat foods were incredibly rare.
You had to expend a massive amount of energy to even get them.
Right. So the brain mechanism that created an intense craving for sugar, the one that prompted us to gorge on ripe fruit whenever we found it, that was incredibly adaptive. It helped us store energy against the inevitable future scarcity.
But today, that exact same mechanism is confronted by cheap, high-calorie, sugary food on every street corner, and it leads directly to chronic diseases like obesity and type 2 diabetes. The craving works exactly as intended, but the environment makes the outcome catastrophic. And the argument here is that our social environment has undergone an even more explosive, even more radical change than our diet.
Without question. The ancestral context was life in small, highly cooperative tribes or clans. The number that's always cited is around 150 people.
Dunbar's number.
And that reflects a real cognitive limit for maintaining stable, meaningful, reciprocal social relationships. In that intimate context, social approval was the absolute gold standard of survival.
Being part of the group meant everything. Shared food, defense against predators, potential mates.
Everything. So to be ostracized or socially rejected, that wasn't just a bad day. It wasn't just feeling left out.
It was a death sentence.
It often was, yes. And here is the crucial, critical disconnect. The digital revolution has occurred in a microscopic evolutionary time frame. We're talking a few decades compared to tens or hundreds of thousands of years our psychological mechanisms spent adapting to a hunter-gatherer life.
Our social software just hasn't had time for an update?
Not even close. So let's focus on two of the key psychological systems that were designed for that tribal world, which are now just completely overwhelmed by the digital one. First, you mentioned the sociometer.
The sociometer, right?
So, sociometer theory describes this innate internal gauge. Its sole function is to monitor the quality of your interpersonal relationships. It's a mechanism that's constantly, subconsciously asking, how valued am I by the people who matter?
And the reading on that gauge, that's what we feel as self-esteem.
That is what we subjectively experience as self-esteem.
So low self-esteem is actually an evolved warning sign. It's not a personal failing, it's an alarm bell ringing.
That is the key reframing. Low self-esteem reflects what we call perceived relational devaluation, the sense that your inclusionary status is dipping to a dangerously low level.
And when that sociometer alarm goes off, it's supposed to motivate you to do something about it.
Exactly. It motivates restorative behaviors. You try to repair bonds, you seek acceptance, you try to demonstrate your value to the group. The system is designed to be incredibly sensitive. It adheres to what's called the smoke detector principle.
Okay, what's that?
The fitness cost of missing one real, lethal social exclusion event like being kicked out of the tribe far, far outweighs the cost of 100 false alarms.
So better safe than sorry.
Much better. So the system is engineered from the ground up to be hypersensitive.
And what makes that hypersensitivity so visceral, so painful, is that the feeling of social exclusion has these incredibly deep ancient roots. I've read that the brain actually processes social pain in the exact same way it processes physical pain.
That is one of the most compelling and frankly chilling insights from modern neuroscience. It gives the sociometer real biological weight.
What have they found in the studies?
Well, neuroimaging studies, fMRIs, have shown that the brain regions that are activated during experiences of social rejection, specifically a part called the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, or DACC, are the very same regions that process the distress component of physical pain.
So in essence, the pain of being given the cold shoulder, of being physically excluded and left vulnerable to predators,
is encoded in your brain as a threat equivalent to a severe physical injury, a broken leg. That's how vital group inclusion was to our survival.
Which makes perfect sense for a small-scale cooperative society. Okay, let's move to the second mechanism. The social comparison system.
This one is just as fundamental. It evolved to help us accurately assess our resource holding potential, or RHP.
Resource holding potential, that's an abstract term.
It is, but think of it as a subconscious metric of how well you would do in a contest, whether it's a physical fight, a social competition, or a race for resources against a rival. You needed to know your place in the pecking order.
Why?
To avoid unnecessary and potentially fatal conflict.
So it's the mechanism that stops a lower-ranking animal from challenging the alpha and getting seriously hurt.
Exactly right. Comparison was critical for navigating status within that finite local group. You compare yourself upward to someone better, and maybe that motivates you toward mastery. I need to learn the skill that person has.
And if you compare downward,
it can regulate your emotions.
Yeah.
I might not have much, but at least I'm better off than that person. The outputs, motivation, submission, emotional regulation were all adaptive based on the immediate observable context of your tribe. It was a tool for local calibration.
Okay, so we've established that our brains are basically tribal brains. They're built to seek status and belonging in a small group. Now let's get into how technology exploits these very systems, starting with the reward circuitry itself. We need to set the record straight on dopamine.
Yes, we do.
It's always called the happiness chemical, but you're arguing that's a dangerous oversimplification.
It's more than an oversimplification. It's a profound misunderstanding that allows this exploitation to flourish. Dopamine's true role is as a motivator, a craving chemical.
Not happiness.
No, it drives the seeking behavior itself, the actual feeling of contentment, of satisfaction, of happiness that's mediated by other chemicals, mainly endogenous opioids and serotonin.
So the feeling isn't the reward itself, but the frantic urgency leading up to the reward.
Precisely. Dopamine fuels what we call the seeking loop. It's released in anticipation of a reward. When you see that notification icon pop up on your screen, when you hear the ping, that is the dopamine spike. It's the chemical in your brain telling you, go get it. Now, something important might be there.
And what happens after you get it? After you click the notification?
The dopamine level rapidly returns to baseline. It crashes. And that quick return leaves you in a state of deficit, which just maintains the hunger for the next seeking event.
That sounds inherently unsustainable. If the reward itself causes the immediate drop-off, you're just instantly seeking the next hit.
And this is where the brain's natural ability to develop tolerance is weaponized against it.
What do you mean by tolerance?
To get the same motivational effect, the brain has to move the goalposts. It demands a higher or more frequent dose of dopamine. So if yesterday's notification spike gave you a 5 on some arbitrary scale, today your brain might demand a 6 or a 7 to get the same level of anticipatory motivation.
So the pursuit becomes more and more desperate, and the rewards feel more and more hollow.
Exactly. The system keeps demanding more seeking behavior just to feel normal, not to feel satisfied.
And if the digital world provides this chemical fuel, it uses the concept of supernormal stimuli to make sure we can't look away.
This is such a powerful concept.
Yeah.
And it's borrowed directly from animal behavior studies, from ethology. A supernormal stimulus is an artificial, exaggerated object that triggers an instinctual response far more powerfully than the natural stimulus it evolved to respond to.
The response is hardwired. It's unavoidable.
Completely.
The famous example is the bird and the giant plaster egg.
Exactly. An oyster catcher will abandon its own clutch of small speckled eggs to try and incubate a giant, brightly colored plaster egg. The plaster egg just exaggerates the key Q-size color that the bird's nesting instinct is hardwired to respond to.
It prioritizes the fake egg over its own biological imperative.
It does. So what's the supernormal stimulus in our digital context?
The social validation. The digital candy, as you call it.
Digital candy. Think about the ancestral social reward. You help a fellow hunter, they smile at you, you share a story, and you feel this small earned boost of belonging. It was effortful, it was reciprocal, it was slow.
And now
the algorithm transforms this into a hyper-concentrated, quantifiable, and instantaneous hit. A like, a heart emoji, a comment. This validation is completely stripped of the effort and the cost of real-life reciprocity. It's pure, fast-acting sugar for the sociometer.
And the platform owners know exactly how to deliver this candy to maximize addiction. They use a variable ratio reinforcement schedule.
The slot machine mechanism. It's the reason slot machines are the most addictive form of gambling.
Yeah.
The rewards are entirely unpredictable.
You don't know when the jackpot is going to hit.
You don't know when the viral post, the flood of likes is going to come. And this uncertainty is critical because the human brain evolved to be highly, highly attuned to unpredictable but vital resources.
Like tracking a sparse food source on the savannah.
Right. If food was predictable, your seeking mechanism would only activate at mealtimes. But if it's sparse and unpredictable, the brain has to keep that seeking loop active constantly, just in case. The platforms leverage this ancient, adaptive mechanism to guarantee constant checking behavior.
So you're driven to check your phone 100 times a day, not because you expect a reward every single time.
But because you don't know which of those 100 checks will yield the massive, unpredictable social jackpot.
I came across a story that perfectly illustrates the psychological reality of this. It was about a young woman, let's call her Chloe. She described her relationship with her phone not as a tool, but as a phantom limb.
A phantom limb, that's a powerful phrase.
She said it pulses with electricity, just compelling her attention.
And what did she say about the feeling of the notification itself, the ping?
She said it feels like a drug, but a drug she doesn't even want anymore. She recognizes that hollow feeling afterward. She knows the scrolling is fruitless, but the compulsion to check is just, it's overwhelming.
So her rational modern brain knows it's pointless.
But her Paleolithic survival brain, driven by that dopamine anticipation spike, is screaming at her, you might miss vital social data. Your survival could be at stake.
And that is the tragedy of it. We're watching her highly functional, perfectly evolved desire for belonging being turned against her. Her psychological hardware is being run into the ground by a sophisticated piece of software that was designed purely for engagement metrics.
It's not a failure of her willpower.
Not at all. It's the inevitable outcome of precision-engineered, supernormal stimuli exploiting the evolutionary demand for variable ratio rewards. She's trapped. She is trapped in the constant dopamine anticipation cycle that the platform needs to survive.
So if the reward system is hijacked, what's the next failure point in the system?
It's the sheer scale of the social environment. It leads to massive cognitive overload. Our evolved social hardware just cannot handle the volume of interaction.
And this is where we come back to Dunbar's number, that cognitive limit of about 150 stable social relationships.
Correct. The human social suite. Our capacity for managing identity, tracking reputation, navigating complex hierarchies, maintaining alliances, all of that is anatomically calibrated for a group of about 150 people.
That was the scale where every piece of social information was locally relevant and actionable.
A scale that seems almost quaint now.
It's a catastrophic evolutionary mismatch of scale. I mean, look at the data. The average adult Facebook user today has a network of 338 friends.
More than double what our brains are built for. And that's just one platform. We are pushing far, far past the 150 limit with an ease that is historically unprecedented.
So the problem isn't just the number, it's also the kind of relationship we're being forced to process. Our ancestral life was built on strong ties.
Strong ties were the foundation of everything. Close friends, family, reliable alliance partners. These were reciprocal relationships where defection was costly and support was, for the most part, guaranteed. The sociometer evolved specifically to monitor the status of these crucial bonds.
But today, the vast majority of our digital network is built on what you'd call weak or latent ties.
Exactly. People we have a fleeting awareness of, or who we might reach out to only occasionally for a small favor. The problem is that our primitive evolved mind can't really differentiate between the two.
Wait, really? My brain treats an acquaintance I haven't seen since high school the same way it treats my partner or my best friend. That just sounds so inefficient.
It's wildly inefficient to the modern logical mind, but it was perfectly adaptive for the Paleolithic mind. In the EEA, if you knew 150 people, pretty much everyone was a strong or a semi-strong tie. The neural cost of tracking an individual was automatically rewarded because that individual contributed to your survival.
And now
we are dedicating enormous cognitive resources to monitoring the inclusionary status of hundreds of people who contribute nothing meaningful to our actual sense of belonging or survival. It's a massive, unnecessary drain on cognitive energy. It generates noise instead of vital information.
And this constant high-stakes monitoring of low-stakes relationships leads directly to fear of missing out to FOMO.
FOMO is the anxiety loop that results from the sociometer being completely ensnared by this continuous stream of low-relevance social information. The digital environment is just so appealing, it contains all that supernormal stimuli, that being away from it triggers the same distress signal as being excluded from the ancestral fire pit.
So FOMO isn't just the annoyance of missing a party invitation. It's the social exclusion alarm screaming at the threat of missing irrelevant data.
That is the evolutionary interpretation, yes. The anxiety compels compulsive checking to monitor social cues and inclusionary status. And neuroscientists have corroborated this. They found that FOMO specifically activates brain regions associated with processing social inclusion signals.
So your biology is treating that endless stream of online information like the most crucial survival data available.
Forcing you into a state of constant vigilance, which is utterly exhausting. The system was designed for high stakes, local relevance, and now we are applying that same high stakes energy to low stakes, global noise.
So if the sheer volume of information overloads the system, the content of that information weaponizes the second ancient mechanism we talked about. The social comparison instinct.
Yes, it creates a state of what I'd call unbounded competition. That comparison mechanism, which was designed for RHP assessment against a few dozen local rivals,
Is now directed toward a global arena of millions. You're subconsciously competing with celebrities, with the top 0.01% of content creators, with curated perfection, all of it amplified by algorithmic boosting. So how does a normal person's biology even cope with trying to calculate their resource-holding potential against a global benchmark that is constantly optimized and always moving?
it can't. It's not designed to. It's designed to give you a local temporary answer. Can I win this fight? Yes or no. When the goalposts are set at an infinite distance, the system just throws an error.
And that error translates into
A chronic, debilitating state of anxiety. The useful motivational function of the comparison instinct, the part that drives you to mastery, it gets completely subverted, leading only to chronic dissatisfaction.
We saw this so vividly in the case of a digital illustrator, a young man in Seoul we're calling Minho.
Ah, yes. Minho is a fascinating and tragic case study in this kind of evolutionary mismatch. Tell us about his situation.
Well, Minho is an incredibly talented young digital illustrator. In any ancestral context, or even just in the pre-digital era, he would have been the celebrated artisan of his community. He would have had high local status.
But he lives in the shadow of this globalized digital coliseum.
Exactly. So when he posts his work, his Paleolithic status-tracking brain desperately tries to calculate his standing.
And that brain is trying to measure his RHP against whom?
Against millions of globally successful peers, people whose work is often amplified by professional marketing and digital manipulation. Minho wrote about feeling a permanent weight in his chest, a low-grade chronic anxiety that just never fully dissipates.
And that is the textbook definition of modernity-induced anxiety. His biology is frantically trying to find his place in a tribe that now consists of 8 billion people. The feedback loop is almost always negative because there is always someone somewhere who is better, richer, or more popular.
And the system is biased toward vigilance.
It is. It's always better, from a survival perspective, to assume a rival is superior than to risk challenging a superior rival and losing. So it just keeps signaling danger. The constant exposure to this unachievable global standard turns a formerly adaptive mechanism into a psychological anchor.
And the content itself is so deceptive. This is the core issue of what you called curated and inflated reality.
That's the algorithmic manipulation at its worst. Social media allows every user to present a highly curated, often manipulated version of their life, the highlight reel.
They magnify success, they manipulate their attractiveness with filters, they flaunt their wealth.
And our psychological mechanisms, which evolved to interpret any display of success and prestige as a genuine instructive cue for survival and status, simply fail to discount this artificially generated information.
So our brain sees a heavily filtered image of a perfect body or a flaunted luxury vacation and processes it as if it's equivalent to seeing a high-status tribal leader who genuinely controls vast resources.
That is the exact mechanism of the supernormal stimulus in the context of status. We are hardwired to pay attention to cues of success, and these platforms deliver cues that are far more intense and far more perfect than reality could ever allow.
And the negative outcomes are severe?
They are. Continuous exposure to these manipulated cues leads to measurably lower life satisfaction, to increased envy, and to profound body image concerns. You see studies focusing on adolescent girls, for example, showing a significant drop in their body image perception after just a few minutes of exposure to manipulated photos compared to the original ones. Our internal measuring stick is being completely warped by impossible standards.
Okay, so if the cognitive and emotional systems are chronically overloaded by this comparison and this unpredictable seeking behavior, the organism eventually enters a state of deep behavioral dysfunction.
It does. And this leads us to the most dire parallel in all of social science. The breakdown observed in John B. Calhoun's Mouse Utopia, Universe 25.
The famous behavioral sink. Let's dive into the specifics of that experiment because it's truly chilling.
Calhoun created an environment that was designed to be a paradise for mice. Limitless food, water, ideal temperature, and a complete absence of predators or disease.
A true utopia.
So the initial population boomed, it grew exponentially until it reached its peak social density. And once that density was reached, something horrifying happened. Social behavior completely collapsed. This is the behavioral sink.
What defined that collapse? What did it look like?
All of the foundational behaviors just ceased. Mating and parenting collapsed entirely. Mothers would abandon their young. Aggression became random and unfocused. But the most alarming group to emerge was a class of mice that Calhoun called the beautiful ones.
The beautiful ones, what made them so distinct?
They were defined by total and complete social withdrawal. They stopped fighting, they stopped mating, they avoided all social interaction whatsoever. And instead, they focused on obsessive, self-directed maintenance, just constant grooming.
So they were physically perfect.
Sleek, unharmed, perfect specimens. But behaviorally, they were extinct. And despite having all their material needs met, the entire population collapsed to extinction. Not due to scarcity, but due to profound behavioral dysfunction.
That is the death squared he talked about. Behavioral collapse leading to biological collapse. The system failed because of social density, not resource scarcity.
It was an intolerance to chronic social density. The mice could not cope with the sheer number of relationships and the constant social signals, and it led them to opt out entirely.
And the human parallel we see today is the rising phenomenon of what we call digital hermits. Pathological social withdrawal, like the hikikomori in Japan, but which we're seeing more and more globally.
So what we label as a disorder, like social anxiety, could actually be an organism's rational response to an intolerable environment.
Exactly. When the high-density digital environment becomes this constant source of scrutiny and judgment and rejection signals, the evolved organism may select a functional, low-energy conservation strategy, withdrawal. The nervous system just concludes. The social environment is lethal. The only way to survive is to exit it entirely.
And we have the example of Kenji, a young man in Tokyo who became a digital hermit. His brain seems to be exhibiting that evolutionary smoke detector principle on overdrive.
Can you walk us through Kenji's situation using that smoke detector analogy?
Sure. Kenji hasn't left his room in months, which on the surface looks like a total behavioral sink. But if you look deeper, you see his brain is hypersensitive to social exclusion because ancestrally being cast out meant certain death.
So in the digital world.
In the digital environment, every unseen message, every lack of engagement on a post, every perceived slight online is interpreted by his ancient survival system as a catastrophic sign of social rejection.
So he's not just feeling minor sadness, he is experiencing chronic, lethal danger signals.
Precisely. His internal smoke detector is screaming fire at every small flicker of a candle. And eventually the system just reaches a breaking point. His anxiety is so functionally debilitating because his nervous system has entered an emergency shutdown mode.
He's preemptively withdrawing.
He is. He's withdrawing from the world because the high-density environment feels like a constant existential threat to his social standing. And the irony is just heartbreaking. The age of total connectivity is forcing our ancient survival mechanisms to trigger total isolation just to achieve a sense of safety.
Kenji and the beautiful ones are choosing self-preservation through complete behavioral disengagement.
And this state is so often misdiagnosed as an individual weakness, when in fact it is a predictable evolutionary response to an environment that has become cognitively and emotionally toxic because of its scale.
Beyond this extreme withdrawal, what are the other measurable psychological consequences of this hyperstimulated environment?
Well, first and foremost is just sheer exhaustion, technostress and fatigue. The continuous influx of notifications, data, and feedback just overwhelms users. We have data showing that nearly 3/4 of users report feeling overwhelmed by these prompts.
And this cognitive overload isn't benign.
Not at all. It leads to chronic mental fatigue, lower productivity, and studies have even linked it to an increase in workplace cyber incivility. When your brain is exhausted, your capacity for measured pro-social behavior just disappears.
There's also the subtle but I think very powerful cost of constantly relying on external metrics for your own self-worth.
That's the loss of autonomy and behavioral dependency. The prevalence of all these self-quantification tools and wearables encourages users to prioritize external data-driven goals over their own intrinsic enjoyment or intuition.
We've seen reports that over 90% of respondents in one study reported this exact shift.
The continuous monitoring and feedback create stress and a dependence on external metrics. You're essentially outsourcing your self-governance to an algorithm.
And this reliance actually erodes our belief in free will.
It does. When an app is dictating when you move or eat or sleep, it psychologically diminishes your belief in your own agency. Studies have found that participants whose daily decisions were guided by apps felt significantly less autonomous. They even reported a reduction in their belief in free will compared to control groups.
We're trading self-trust for external optimization.
And finally, there's the obsession with vague social cues.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it's the inevitable result of that hijacked sociometer. It continues to interpret these ambiguous metrics, follower counts, likes, superficial comments as crucial inclusionary cues, even though these metrics are often algorithmically generated or manipulated.
So it creates this intense artificial pressure for validation.
Which drives constant compulsive checking behaviors. The mechanism that once ensured your value in a small, vital community now compels you to seek validation from a data point that may not represent any genuine human approval at all. It leads to profound effort with absolutely no relational return.
Okay, it's clear the pathology is systemic. So we have to stop telling the individual to just be stronger and start demanding that the system be redesigned. The solutions have to address this evolutionary mismatch head-on.
That shift in focus to system redesign is paramount. We have to build digital environments that are less exploitative of our ancient vulnerabilities. And the irony is that the same technology that created this problem, AI, may be essential to fixing it.
So how does AI make that transition from being the optimization engine for engagement to the optimization engine for well-being?
We can leverage AI for well-being by using it to monitor physiological and emotional states, rather than just clicks and views. Machine learning models can already detect patterns that indicate user stress or cognitive fatigue or a spiraling negative emotional state with very high accuracy.
So if the system knows, in real time, that a user is entering a state of cognitive overload,
it could implement adaptive algorithms.
Meaning the system would automatically throttle itself back.
Exactly. The algorithm could automatically adjust the frequency, the intensity, and even the tone of notifications. It would be a dynamic system designed to prevent the cognitive overload that triggers technostress, rather than promoting the constant stimulation that drives it. The optimization goal shifts from maximum attention to psychological sustainability.
That sounds like a huge uphill battle, though. It requires platforms to actively reduce engagement time, which runs completely counter to their business model.
It absolutely challenges the core economic model, there's no question. But developers can also redesign the content itself to promote intrinsic motivation.
How so?
This means reducing systems of public comparison and replacing them with individualized goal tracking. So instead of competitive leaderboards and public ranks, which just fuel that toxic upward comparison, AI can personalize feedback, focusing solely on the individual user's progress against their own previous benchmarks.
So it turns comparison inward, where it can actually be useful, instead of outward, where it's debilitating.
Exactly. But the deeper structural problem remains the scale. The failure of Dunbar's number. How do we reduce the cognitive cost of monitoring 300-plus weak ties?
We need to restore social structure.
We need to create digital boundaries that mimic the scale and utility of ancestral groups. Algorithms should be adjusted to prioritize social information from strong ties, your close friends, your family, known and reliable alliance partners, rather than constantly feeding you the noise from weak ties or remote influencers.
Could a system actually define an information boundary like that? Limit your exposure to a network size closer to 1 of 50?
It's technically feasible, yes. The system could filter feeds to ensure the sociometer is only expending energy on monitoring people who contribute meaningfully to the user's actual belonging.
But this is where the business resistance would be strongest.
Absolutely. So much of the platform's revenue comes from connecting you to novel content and advertising delivered by those influencers, those weak ties. Limiting that exposure means limiting their reach. But structurally, redefining that boundary is crucial for letting the sociometer function adaptively again.
Let's talk about the broader cultural imperatives, starting with the toxicity that just thrives online. We have to address anonymity.
We must confront anonymity. Anonymity is completely evolutionarily novel. In the EEA, your reputation and your identity were perfectly known. Every single action had a social consequence.
But anonymity removes accountability entirely.
It does. It drastically tilts the cost-benefit analysis for harmful behaviors like cyberbullying and incivility. When the cost of engaging in toxic behavior is near zero, that behavior flourishes. Restoring known identity and accountability is crucial to mitigate the behaviors that drive withdrawal and anxiety.
And finally, since these digital cues are so powerful, if we can't fully redesign the system overnight, we need to teach our Paleolithic brains how to manually override the supernormal stimuli.
That is media literacy as overriding the system. Our minds struggle profoundly to differentiate evolutionarily novel cues, a digital like, a curated image, from real high-stakes social cues. We have to consciously teach users to recognize the supernormal stimuli for what it is.
What does that look like in practice?
Social media literacy programs need to explicitly explain that metrics like likes are arbitrary, they're manipulated, they're often influenced by algorithms, and therefore they do not reflect genuine social approval or relational value. It's about equipping the individual to put a necessary psychological distance between their intrinsic worth and a meaningless external metric.
So to bring it all together,
The collapse in well-being we're observing, it's not a crisis of human failure. It's the predictable mechanistic outcome of our hardwired biological software encountering a radically new and aggressive operating environment. The essential first step toward mitigating this crisis is recognizing the precise evolutionary frailties being exploited.
the dopamine loop driving endless seeking,
The social comparison instinct that collapses under global scrutiny.
and the hypersensitive social exclusion alarm, the smoke detector, that forces us into catastrophic withdrawal.
We must understand this deep biological mismatch to build digital environments where our human biology can once again find stability and thrive.
And that realization, I think, compels us to understand that the biological, the social, and the technological aspects of this crisis are entirely integrated. They can't be separated. The survival and the health of the digital animal depends entirely on how and how quickly we redesign the modern digital savanna to be a place our ancient brains can recognize and process without crashing.